Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Widgets and Wonders. This is my weekly show about great products from small companies. Now today we're going to be looking at a company itself, Massive Awesome, and their new game Shattered Earth, which takes place in a alternate timeline future where the world is just straight up gone bad. And this will be the first episode where I get to do something really cool and new, where I actually interview and get to talk to one of the game designers. This is Simon Barlow and his discussion of Shattered Earth. We're going to take a look while we talk. It's about an hour long. It's going to be a long Widgets and Wonders about the pictures, the models, the art, and a whole bunch of the stuff that I've actually done too to prep to show you this game in a Let's Play. So I'm hoping I get to do more of this in the future. I've got another one of these lined up, but doing interviews with the designers themselves and chatting lets you guys hear more about them, more about the products, and hopefully gets you excited about seeing what this thing is all about. So without any further ado, let's talk to Simon from Massive Awesome Games about Shattered Earth. All right, so here we have Simon from Massive Awesome, and he's going to talk to us a bit today about Massive Awesome itself and Shattered Earth. So, who is Massive Awesome? What's your history and what's your mission?
Okay, cool. Thanks, Ash. So Massive Awesome was a company that myself and an old friend set up about 12 months ago, just as a way to produce something new, something different, something that we wanted to play ourselves. And really, at the start, we had no real grand plans for this. We just had a few ideas that we were kicking around for a game setting, and then some ideas for miniatures and some rules. And it's kind of snowballed from there, and sort of 12 months later, we're looking at sort of launching on Kickstarter, and it's become very, very real, very, very quickly. So, yeah, as I said, two friends, we've known each other for a very long time. We've both had previous careers to this. I spent 15 years in the video games industry. John is still employed in the banking industry. So we've got a lot of experience outside of this, but we've always enjoyed hobby games as fans. We felt that it was time for us to make something ourselves, to do something a little bit different to the games that we experienced, and to see if we could create something that excited other people as much as we've been excited by games in the past.
Okay, so why a tabletop game then? What put you on a path towards crowdfunding something that's a miniature game? I mean, coming from video games, obviously this is a bit more of a niche.
Very much so. To be honest, that was the first question my wife asked me. Really, was why aren't you kickstarting a video game? She was like, "You've got 15 years experience of that. Why aren't you doing that?" And I mean, truth be told, we did think about something along those lines, but really our passion has always been tabletop, whether that's miniature games, board games, role-playing games. There's something very rewarding about the tactile nature of tabletop games. And it was, I guess, a shot, really. The more we got into this, we realized it was a shot at trying to do something that we absolutely loved and trying to make a career out of it. Could we do something we loved for a living? And that was really the kind of the sole goal in the beginning, I guess, just to do something that brought a smile to our faces, that brought some joy to the tabletop, and hopefully we could build a community around that.
Well, what's interesting is you've actually got a fair bit done. So you are using a crowdfunding thing, Kickstarter here, but you have models for at least 3 factions finished. And the reason I know that is I've got a bunch of them in front of me. I just painted a bunch. So you guys are probably looking at pictures of some of these models right now. I've got a bunch of the Deathless painted, and I've got some of the UN painted as well. Mike, who's also a member of the Gaming Co-op, is going to be painting the Cult of the Dragon, because they were the prettiest miniatures and the ones that looked the hardest to assemble, so I gave him the pen.
Yeah, Jormungandr's, he's a bag of bits right there. He's a pretty impressive miniature.
I was like, these ones come in 4 bags. These ones come in 25 bags. Mike will be happy with this. But you've got a fair bit done. So this isn't really your standard crowdfund where you have an idea and you have not really anything finished but an idea. You're in production already. Like, you've produced miniatures, and this is more about showing them off and getting them in people's hands.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, for us, it was important. As I said before, it was a shot at trying to do this for a living, really. We never intended this Kickstarter to just be a one-off where we released a bunch of minis, or, we could have done a board game, let's say. It's a smoother process, I think, to do a board game than launching an entire tabletop miniatures range. So we could have done that, just at a one-shot and be done with it. But this was an opportunity for us to try and build a setting, build a universe, and build a miniatures range that we could grow with. And in terms of getting so much work done, we realized up front that this is a pretty crowded market. We are I've backed, I don't know how many projects on Kickstarter, too many, more than I've told my wife. And John's the same. You know, we enjoy the kind of entertainment aspect of Kickstarter. We enjoy funding games and companies that we feel are deserving of that money. That
it's almost like an advent calendar. You get these things that show up randomly throughout the year, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember this.
That's the fun part. I have, this is probably revealing a little bit too much about myself, but I have a little spreadsheet at home, just a little Excel sheet with like all of the projects I've backed, all the different goodies that I'm getting, when they're going to arrive. Like, I know, but I guess that's my background in games.
That's funny.
So
go on.
Yeah, I guess from our point of view, it was important that, for two reasons really, it was important that we went through the process at least once, like one complete loop. And that was one, for our own personal understanding, because we'd never made miniatures before. Like, we haven't done this. So it was important for us that we at least got one or two miniatures all the way through to production. So we understood the process from start to finish. And we'd, you know, any of the problems that were thrown up during that process, we'd experienced them. We'd either solved them or knew how we were going to solve them in production. And secondly, I think it gives people confidence when it comes to Kickstarter that we're not asking for the money so that we can start this. We're asking for the money so that we can finish it.
Yeah, like, that's a big deal for me, actually, even just helping you and having this conversation and showing people the miniatures is very often when crowdfunds run into trouble, it's because something's changed. So either the costs of delivering what they want to deliver were unknown when they started, and they've overpromised, and now they can't actually get it done, or just things change. Like currency conversion can affect what you actually can produce. If the cost of oil suddenly skyrockets, plastic becomes more expensive, or resin becomes more expensive, or tin becomes more expensive, you might just not have actually raised the money you need to deliver what you're going to deliver.
Absolutely. There's always going to be those unknowns, I think, and you have to. There's only so much that you can plan for in advance, and that's like any project, right? You know, we plan as much as we can up front. We've gone through this iteration, and even during the iteration, like while we're going through these miniatures and we're producing them at different times and different stages, and costs will change based on the conversion rate between different currencies, because we're working with people all over the world. And
absolutely. But you've done it once, so you have more of an idea than a lot of these crowdfunds that I've seen as to what the actual financial plan is going to be.
For sure, yeah. We're trying to use Kickstarter for what it's meant for. I feel like a lot of times with Kickstarter, it's basically treated just as a shop window.
Yeah.
And there is a certain aspect of that. Like, we have got miniatures that we've already produced, and there will be, you know, content available for people day one on Kickstarter. You know, the funding total really for us is going to be to fund the other two factions.
Yeah.
You know, you said before we've got the 3 done. We'd like the other 2 starter boxes done at the very least.
Yeah.
And we just don't have the funds ourselves. We've already poured quite a lot of money, our own personal money, into this. And so we need other people's help for that. But also it's an opportunity for us to engage with the community themselves. And we have, you know, over the last 12 months, we built up a really cool group of fans that really want to see, you know, they're interested in this game. They really want to see it come to fruition. And they've been super helpful already in defining the direction that we go in. And so that was key for us with Kickstarter as well. That's why I said about using the money to finish it. You know, it's getting that money off people, delivering the product, but it's also inviting them into the conversation and saying, look, guys, you know, you're now invested in this. What is it that you actually want to see? Like, how do you want these rules to change? Are they streamlined enough? Are they too streamlined? You know, which are the factions that you feel need a bit of work? Which are the, you know, what sort of miniatures do you want to see? Did the UNM need like some heavy armor or something? Like, is that what you're looking for? We want to be able to engage in those conversations, and Kickstarter really is the perfect platform for that, because you have that direct communication with your buyer.
And having stuff done already, I imagine that would actually speed up the time between funding and people even seeing stuff. Because a lot of times, if nothing's ready at all, if nothing's been done, a crowdfund ends, it could be 2-3 years before you actually play with a toy soldier. But
yeah, absolutely.
I'm sitting here looking at toy soldiers you guys actually already have in production.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was, oh gosh, you know, getting those miniatures it's been a highlight of like 2015 for me, really. Going from like an idea in our heads like 12 months ago to actually having a physical, like this beautifully cast resin miniature in your hands was just unbelievable. And I actually received yesterday the Cult of the Dragon Pro paints back from Robert Carlson, otherwise known as Rogland. Very, very sort of famous pro painter. And I mean, you can see the photographs of them up on our Facebook page, but actually holding them and seeing them kind of in the flesh, so to speak, was just, I'm not normally very quiet. I'm not a quiet person, as you probably tell, but I was very quiet. I just sat down and kind of looked at them for about 10 minutes.
A little soul-searring moment where you've created something. Yeah, I'm not going to say it's like parenthood, but that's kind of what parenthood's like.
a little bit. Although my daughter's stayed away from them, thankfully, so far. I don't think the studio paints need a 4-year-old picking them up.
Not at all. No. That's why I have a studio, so all my stuff can live safely apart from my family. All right, well, let's talk about the game then. So your game Shattered Earth, it's set in a post-apocalyptic future. What are some of your favorite things that you've drawn inspiration from for this setting? That's something I love talking about with artists and creators and designers. Is that everyone kind of has this history in pop culture that fuels their imagination and the things they create. So, what are some of the things that you have had in your past and your history that's made this setting in your head?
It's a whole mix of things, I think. As I alluded to before, John and I are kind of old school role players as well. And in fact, I still role play. Thankfully, like my wife lets me role play twice a week, which is very kind of her. Yeah, absolutely. I kept that going. But it's been, for me, role playing is one of the biggest influences, not just in the settings that we play, but also the interactions between people. And I love the stories, the kind of the on the fly storytelling that happens. And for me, that's kind of sometimes missing from miniatures games. And for us, the whole narrative backbone of Shattered Earth was as important as the rules and the miniatures themselves. Like, they're the 3 key pillars behind the game. And we have to get all 3 of them right. But it was absolutely the setting that came first. And our influences, I suppose, this is not a typical post-apocalyptic setting. We're calling it's the post-apocalyptic universe of wondrous technology and existential horror. That's the kind of tagline, which is a pretty bold statement, I guess. Mm-hmm. But this isn't most post-apocalyptic settings tend to have that Mad Max feel, that kind of, either it's an irradiated wasteland like Fallout, or it's got that, whole desert vibe from Mad Max, where everybody's looks like a punk rocker and is riding around in these like open wheel vehicles. Yeah. We've taken a slightly different tack, and we looked at, a lot of our background is built on extrapolating sort of geopolitical models from now to what would happen in that kind of future in 50, 60, 70 years time. How would the continent shift? How would, if there was a series of huge, in Shattered Earth, there's this huge series of natural disasters, these extinction level events that just absolutely pound the planet's surface. Volcanoes erupting, earthquakes, tidal waves, tsunamis, this over the course of close to 2 decades, just this continual pounding, and that's hence the name Shattered Earth. The world is literally shattered at this point. And we looked at this model of the Earth about how the tectonic plates would shift and what that would mean for the continents and the countries, where the borders would be drawn. Certain aspects of certain areas of landmass would actually be underwater at this point.
Yeah, Florida would just be gone. There'd be all kinds of places that just be disappeared.
Absolutely. It totally changes the landscape of the Earth. And then if you look at that map and think, okay, well, what does the Earth look like? What does that mean for the people on it? So in Shattered Earth, this is, 80% of the world's population are just gone, like over the course of these 2 decades, and in the kind of years following that. The jet stream's all choked up with volcanic ash. There's very little daylight in most places. It's a very harsh and inhospitable wasteland for the most part. But there are still areas of the world that are, I'm not going to say untouched, but still habitable. And actually some of the major strongholds, so for example, the United Nations of Mankind, are built as out of a cooperation between Russia and America. And there's a whole, it's probably a little bit too much to go into for the purposes of this interview, but there's a whole backstory about why these 2 kind of former Cold War enemies, if you like, actually ended up working together. And again, that's based upon extrapolating from now out into the future, like how the landmass is going to look, where the different trade routes are going to be, where the resources are going to be available, and how people would actually try and rebuild after such a huge event.
Without airplanes.
Without airplanes, yeah, precisely. Like nobody... And also because of the water, like people are trying to kind of sail these seas, but they're still Like, it's so treacherous, the water, because the tides are so different and nobody really understands how to navigate. It's like,
and even the land masses are gone, so all your old maps would be useless. And it's
Absolutely.
almost taking you back to the colonial expansion of Europe out into the world and discovering new land masses and stuff.
Very much so. And in fact, in the stuff that we've released so far, we're only really looking at the sort of the northern hemisphere, largely because of how far everything has drifted apart. Yeah. And actually, like, most of the southern hemisphere, nobody in the northern hemisphere knows what the hell's going on there. Like, there's no communication lines. Like, the transatlantic communication links have all just been completely decimated.
There's no satellites because they can't get through. Yeah,
because they can't get through the atmosphere. So it's, even though there are, like, those resources are still there, they're still out there. And actually, because there's less people now, there's enough resources to go around finally. But they're really hard to get at. And that's where the conflict arises. That's why it's a miniature war game. The conflicts, the skirmishes that people will be taking part in are going to be kind of essentially fighting over territory or fighting over these resources, because that's still where the power is. Certainly for factions like the UNM, who are very much built on the kind of the old ethics prior
consolidate all your resources, become a power, create infrastructure, all of that typical. It can always be cold and heartless, but it's the typical sort of machines of industry as they try and set themselves up.
Precisely, they want to go back to they saw the world working well before this occurred, so they just want to bring it back to where it was.
Right.
There's obviously some more radical factions in the game, and what the key, I guess, the key hook for the Shattered Earth setting is we build it upon this authentic history, if you like, or this. There's obviously it's fictional. We've applied a lot of creative license to it, but we've based the backstory in
the world of today. Yeah,
the world of today.
It's not some other planet that we've gone to here. It's our world in a new shape. And it's funny because that echoes lots of things to me. It echoes a little bit of Cormac McCarthy's The Road, with the unnamed natural disasters just shattering everything. It's got a bit of riffs in it where there's all kinds of sort of oddness as well. So it's kind of grounded in science, but oddness is kind of leaking through into the world. And that's what engaged me, was there was some echoes of things I was familiar with, but in this sort of great new shape where it all got to be together in one place.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, we, from a kind of our own influences point of view, it's like, we're smashing together the worlds of people like Richard Morgan and Alistair Reynolds with like Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman.
Yeah, there's what was that Warren Ellis one too? There's that comic book, Freak Angels.
Oh yes,
natural disasters and all the water levels rise, and everyone's kind of stuck on rafts and rafted together stuff. And it's just central England, and like the north is pretty much all that's left, where there's elevation, and central London is like just mostly underwater. People are actually living on the tops of buildings because London's actually completely submerged, and it's all kind of it's almost Venetian. Everyone has kind of like rafts, and the Thames has just overflown and covered everything. It's really neat. So every game needs a hook. Yes. What's the top 3 things that make you excited about the game you're designing? So you said those 3 pillars before. If you can give me a hook from each of them that you think is going to draw in the people that like that about a game?
Sure. Yeah, I think from seeing as we're talking about the background, we'll start with that. We've taken what is essentially a real world setting. But we've given it a twist, and this is where I guess the wondrous technology and the existential horror aspect comes into it. So what happened during these series of natural disasters was, well, they weren't exactly all that natural. There was a rupture, if you like, a breach between 2 worlds, our world and what we have come to know as the Immateria, which is the world of dreams.
Lovecraftian almost, the silver key, Randolph Carter and all that.
And it's kind of got that. That's where the Neil Gaiman aspect comes from as well. It's that, this is the dream world, and it's the key. One of the key hooks, really, and the key questions within the backstory is: did we, like, this is where we go when we dream, but did we physically go there because it's a place, or did we create it when we dreamed? And that's one of the key sort of narrative hooks, if you like. What is this place? Did we, was it our own creation, or, for the likes of somebody like Hieronymus Bosch, when he painted the Garden of Unearthly Delights, did he dream about that? And that's what he painted? Or by him painting it and then dreaming about it, did it create that world in the Immateria? Lovecraft is a great example. Of course, in the world of Shattered Earth, Lovecraft would have existed, and the Cthulhu mythos would have existed because he dreamt about it. But did he have visions of it while he was there? Yeah.
So it's chicken and egg. Which came first? Are you seeing this other side, or are you creating it?
All right, Ukraine, exactly. And who knows? Maybe it's a bit of both. And we deliberately, I think, in the fiction, show things from different people's perspectives, and they'll each give you a piece of the story. And really, we leave a lot of it open ended because, certainly from my point of view, I love it when settings just give me enough to make me think. And then I will go away and I will certainly think about that. And I'll go and read Wikipedia and I'll go and talk to my friends about it, and we'll try and fill the blanks in. And we wanted people to do that with our game. We wanted to give them a really compelling setting, but throw in a few curveballs and have them think about it and discuss it and work out what's really going on.
That is, I think, the mark of a truly good setting. And I talked about this in miniature wargaming in a few of my sort of sit and chat shows, where it's always the holes that prompt all of the things that people like to do in a hobby like this. They make you create miniatures. They make you create backstories for your stuff. It's filling up a hobby like this with your own imagination. And a great, I think, bit of writing always leaves you with the questions. And there's always that joke of how was Star Wars ruined? Well, they gave too many answers. They tried to answer every single question and no one got to fill it up. But it's also the same reason why this bit character from the original series, like Boba Fett, becomes the most famous character on Earth. He's the world's worst delivery man. That's all he does in the entire series. But he's obsessed over, because no one knows who is this masked, blank-faced, cool-looking bounty hunter. And it got filled up over the years. So I think that's a wonderful bit of design, is those kinds of existential questions and writing in the background are, if people love obsessing over a background, then that's the best way to put it together, is that you give them just enough to make them interested, and then they start trying to put the pieces together for themselves everywhere else.
For sure. And we hope we're spending so much time on this trying to, John is pretty much solely responsible for the writing, and he's leaving me to do a lot of the rules. And that's kind of, we obviously collaborate on it, but that's really his baby, and he's pouring so much time into this to try and make sure that it has those hooks for people to kind of to dig into and to chew over. So that's really that was our thinking behind the fiction, if you like, the world that we're trying to create, and that's what came first. After that, of course, you start talking about the factions and the different characters, the personalities within your world, and that obviously leads on to the miniatures. And for the miniatures, really, the hook, I guess, is we set our stall out pretty early. Now, this is debatable, and this is going to sound like pure hyperbole at this point, but our goal really was to create, some of the most detailed, if not the most detailed miniatures on the market. Like that was what we said we were going to try and do.
Well, having handled them, I'll tell you right now that you've certainly nailed a fineness of detail. Now, they're cast in resin, and maybe I can back you up a bit on this, as opposed to just talking about them, because we'll be looking at pictures of miniatures when this is actually airing, and there'll be pictures of miniatures revolving around. But you've definitely got a. If I was to give a sort of an analog to other miniature lines that people consider to be finely detailed, I would say that the scale and sort of level of detail would be on par with something like an Infinity miniature, or a current range Malifaux miniature, where you've certainly gone for very realistic proportions, and the scale is such that they look. There is not an exaggerated heroicism to any of the humans, but I think what that does is it makes the exaggerations on the monsters even more impressive. So the monsters have these wonderfully exaggerated, sort of insane proportions, and I'm going to use a Lovecraftian term, non-Euclidean dimensions.
Yeah, very much so.
where they are unnatural and off-putting. But I think that's really well sort of juxtaposed to the humans that look very much like, they look like modern military figures. They look like scale models of sort of military, and obviously they have like high level technology and some interesting and unique looking sort of futuristic kit like hanging off them. But they look like regular Joe Blows. And I think that in most great science fiction, especially hard science fiction, that's where the I would say the compellingness comes from visually, is when you have the average man facing down this insane monster. So I would agree. You've definitely, especially for a first offering, gone above and beyond when it comes to the model design.
Thank you.
The quality is very high.
Well, I'm glad you said that. People would be somewhat skeptical if that came out of my mouth.
If I hadn't touched them, I wouldn't be saying it, but I've actually built and painted.
Well, that's why I was so keen to get you to get your hands on these, just to have a look at them, really, because we're so proud of them, and I've talked a lot about myself and John, because that's Massive Awesome is basically just the two of us, but it isn't really. It's a whole swathe of extremely extremely talented, extremely hardworking collaborators. From the people that created the original concept art, to the sculpts, right the way down to the 3D prints and the casting itself. And I guess from our point of view, it was the only way we could nail the design and the quality of these miniatures was to work with the best people in the business. And we started off by I come from obviously a video game background, so I was looking at purely digital production pipelines, and because that's what I know and understand. But I also felt that if we stayed digital for as long as possible, we could maintain the highest level of detail, and it meant that I was very keen to keep the miniatures in sort of true scale proportions rather than heroic proportions, for exactly the reasons that you've described, so that it accentuates the otherworldly, esoteric aspects of the game. It was, one of our design goals early on, certainly for the Deathless faction. One of our design goals was to try and make them as terrifying as they were beautiful, and that was the kind of the guidelines that we gave to our art team.
There's an almost, I would say, a Guillermo del Toro art direction there.
Yeah,
especially the Chernobyl. He's got that eyeballs in the hands kind of look. Pan's Labyrinth-y sort of demon angel thing.
Yeah, the Marco Caradonna was the original concept artist for the Deathless, and he's a huge Guy Davis fan. And when I started describing what I wanted the Deathless to look like, and immediately just said, "You mean like Guy Davis?" And I was like, "Pretty much, yeah." Like, if
10-10, yes, mark it down, make it so.
If you can deliver me original artwork that has that feel and that flavor, then I'll be a very happy man. And I am a very happy man. I think he's done exactly that, and it's been mirrored in the sculpt. Glauco Longhi, the sculptor who produced the Deathless sculpts, he totally got it as well. We looked out with those two guys because they both understood the direction for that faction, and that faction could have gone very, very wrong. We didn't want it to look like Cthulhu wannabes. We didn't want it to have that, because everybody has some kind of Cthulhu range. It's like zombies. Everybody does it.
Yep,
and we didn't want to do it. We didn't want to feel like everybody else. We wanted to look and feel different to what else was out there. We wanted to stand out a little bit. And I feel like we've achieved that.
Well, I've certainly never painted a chest-mouthed wilder orangutan before, so I don't really know how else to describe them. Maybe bat. The arms are almost, if they had wings, they'd be bat-like. It's certainly, you've definitely got some definitely unique-looking critters here, which I think is it is making me enjoy. I actually painted them first on purpose because I wanted to kind of I guess cement my idea of what the bad guys would look like, so that I could get the good guys to look cleaner and have sort of a nice juxtaposition. And I had a lot of fun painting them. They were super fun to paint. But
I like the fact that you're assuming that they're the bad guys as well.
Sorry, they're not the Marines.
There's no black and white in Shadow, so I'm just saying.
When you're just Johnny Rifleman, everybody else is the bad guy because your equipment was made by the lowest bidder. So I always have empathy for those guys. But yeah, no, I don't think there's such thing as good guys and bad guys. But certainly in the classic paradigm of monsters versus knights, we have some knights and we have some monsters.
Yeah, we also have some knights that are monsters as well, which is quite interesting.
That's exciting future information that I haven't seen yet. But yeah, so what about the game itself? Talk to me about the hook for the game.
So the game was
the alpha rules a little bit, so you can talk in rules terms, and I can probably clarify for the audience what you mean.
Okay, no problem. So the rules were, this is really the biggest risk for me, because I guess I built a 15-year career doing game design. So I felt like if I can't write a compelling rule book, I've probably been wasting my time for the last decade and a half. So it's been, from my point of view, there's an adage in the games industry, which I think originally came from Electronic Arts, probably. Most of these ideas come from EA when you trace them back to their source. And it's known as the rule of thirds, not to be confused with the rule of thirds in artwork. And what it means is, or what it states is, if you're designing something that's completely new, there should be, you should aim for, and these aren't hard and fast percentages, but you should aim for a third of it to be the same as something else or familiar, a third of it to be similar to something else but better, an improvement on what came before, and a third of it to be completely different, completely new. The argument being, if you do something that's too similar to something else, people kind of, they may initially like it, but they'll get bored pretty quickly. if it's too original or too unique or too out there, people just won't be able to find the hooks in it and won't be able to understand what it is you're trying to promote. You know, if you've got these great ideas, but if nobody can see them, then you've kind of failed at that. So it's a framework and a set of guidelines really that help you steer whatever it is that you're designing into the best possible end result, if you like. So that was kind of my mantra. Again, they're not hard and fast percentages. You don't completely stick to them. But you have
mental sort of bulwarks. If you've gone too far down one rabbit hole, you can catch yourself incorrect.
Absolutely. And the point is, you can break that rule. Like any rule, you can break it as long as you understand why it works in the first place. Mm-hmm. So that was a key goal for us. The other thing was, I believe that game design, or any design, but certainly game design, should be a process of simplification. So you always start with absolutely everything on the table, like the most, the most crunchiness, the most weight or depth to the game that you can get out. And then you start to simplify. And the process of simplification refines those core ideas down to the point where, like, anybody should just be able to sort of pick it up, and within 5 or 10 minutes of demoing the game, they kind of get the core concepts pretty much straight away. So that if you then start throwing more advanced stuff at them, they already understand the basics, and every rule rolls from one to the other. So they were the sort of the core tenets, I guess, if you like, of the game design.
Do you subscribe to Slay Your Darlings?
The what, sorry?
You subscribe to Slay Your Darlings, where if you have an idea that you find yourself working on way too much, you just cut it completely.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, for sure. And that's come down from experience more than anything else. I think like it's so hard to do that when you first start designing, to just like basically you're effectively killing your children. Like that's the way it was described by my ex-boss.
Yeah.
And you have to do that because like nobody likes anything to suck. And ultimately, if you can't get it to work, it sucks. You have to admit that it sucks and move on from it.
Yeah, my design friend who loves Slay Your Darlings as a design tenant, his thing was that if you're the person that should most understand how this is supposed to work, and you can't make this work, then it's not going to work. It's simple. No one else is ever going to understand this like you do. So this one's broken. Move on.
Move on. Absolutely. So, and I've been doing that a lot. In fact, actually, the alpha rules I sent you a few days ago, I've changed a few things today as well, just on a whim because I had another idea. But essentially,
so what is it? Those are your tenets. What do you think the hook's going to be in this one?
The hook for us is, again, it comes down to there is a thread, right? There is a common thread that ties the background, the miniatures, and the rules together, and that's this what we call Ever. And Ever is the MacGuffin. Okay, it's the the thing that binds everything together, but it you find that thread in everything. It's deeply embedded in the backstory, which leads into the scenario and the narrative design, which leads into the rules design, which leads into the design of the miniatures. And from a rules point of view, Ether is I spoke before about how these natural disasters weren't all that natural, and kind of when the doorway to the immaterial was open, this strange and esoteric energy kind of leaked into our world, and that was called Ether, and it brought about a new science of etherology as people started to understand its properties a bit more and started to use it to actually create things. But in its wake came the Deathless, and the Deathless were beings from the immateria. And the ones that people have seen so far are the ones that are based on Slavic mythology and folklore, mainly because that was actually the geographical area that the breach was found, and that was the breach that they poured out of. So the speculation is that the immateria itself is a kind of a mirror world to our own and has its own geographical locations based in myth and folklore. So Ether is bleeding into the world.
It's actually on the table. You actually haven't looked at the rules. It gets deployed on the table.
It does, yeah. When you set up a scenario, you create Ether breaches. So wherever you turn up, because I said early on that these are all conflicts, fighting over resources or fighting over different things out in the shattered world itself, and these breaches are out there, and they form part of the battlefield. Again, it's tying the fiction directly into the game mechanics. So at the start of the game, you'll set it up, you'll kind of randomize where these breaches appear, or semi-randomize, and from those breaches, people can draw Ether. We have these types of people and creatures in the game that we call shapers, and shapers are the ones who have the ability to work with this energy source and alter reality. It's the power of dreams, essentially, or making dreams real. So shapers are extremely powerful models on the tabletop. They can extract this Ether out of the breach, and then can use it in a range of different ways. Again, depending on who they are and what sort of abilities they have. But it's a physical thing. It's not just something that, it's not just a bunch of tokens that you get at the start of the game. You have to physically go to the breach and draw it forth from that. And you can close breaches. There are some creatures and some people that have the ability to actually open new breaches as well. So you can reconfigure the rules of the game as you're playing it on the tabletop.
That's interesting. So there's a lot of interaction with the actual table surface, and it matters really that you're playing in this Shattered Earth. The table will interact with the models, and the models will interact with the table. Now, are you planning on doing models for the breaches?
Well, yeah, we've talked about that. There's a lot of there's a lot of different sort of statuses and conditions in the game as well that we've built a kind of. Again, this goes back to what I was saying before about this design being a process of simplification.
Yeah.
One of the other main sort of thrusts of the game design is that it's all keyword based. So we've got very straightforward and easy to understand core rules, and the depth comes from the interactions between the rules, not necessarily from the rules themselves. So I wouldn't say it's entirely combo driven. It's not got that kind of. There are aspects of it that feel a bit like, I don't know, something like War Machine or Hordes is very combo driven. Mm-hmm. And there is an aspect to Shattered Earth that you can set things in motion a few turns in advance, and then you can combo into different things. But there's also just the keyword-based system means that we write a rule once, and then we don't have to write it again.
Yeah, if 25 rules with the same name that all have slightly varied effects. That's actually usually an addition change process. Is the rule books tend to consolidate all of their rules into the same names. And actually, you mentioned War Machine. Between Mark 1 and Mark 2, that happened a lot. You had 3 different spells with different names and the same effect. It's good that you're going into that with eyes open, because I think that especially initial rule sets tend to be much stronger if there's a palette of available special rules that are then used to paint the differences between models and factions. But that as you add layers, you very selectively add to that palette. You don't just go and add a whole new wave of stuff that might be similar or dissimilar. And even when that palette can scale, so you might have a rule, but it has 3 different levels. So you could have a level 1 of some special rule, level 2 and a level 3, and they all get slightly stronger. So it makes learning the game easier, because everything can come from a set sort of I guess cross section of abilities. Yeah, and then as a game designer too, it lets you paint sort of strengths and weaknesses throughout the game. So I think that's really useful, especially for learning a new game. It does use dice pools. That's something that I don't know if you were going to mention, but having read the alpha rules, it's about target numbers and dice rules, and that's reminiscent of games actually very often ship-based and naval games use dice pools, where you're trying to sort of consolidate an action down into all of the micro actions that go into it, and then capture an overall result. So what was the decision there? Because that would be one of the things that for a lot of gamers I think would be unfamiliar, is not using small amounts of dice, but actually using slightly larger amounts of dice.
Very much so. It was there was a couple of reasons really. One, the maths worked out really nicely when I was working on this. But the main reason really was I hate in games when what I have to do involves a lot of calculation. And that calculation can be twofold. It can be I have to work out a whole bunch of stuff, and then maybe my target number changes, and this roll I need a 7, but on this roll I need to roll low or something. And then also I don't like having to ask my opponent to modify my dice roll. I don't want to know what your model does, and okay, so I get a -2 to that roll, which means my target number is now this, and I didn't want any of that. What I wanted
was a lot more at a glance this way.
Very much so. The core system is there's 4 core stats to each model, which represent your kind of physical and mental characteristics. So there's physique, agility, mind, and defenses, and and defenses actually includes, I guess, just natural toughness and your ability to dodge things and stuff like that. So we bundle a few different things into those stats, and then you have one key stat, which is your pro stat, which stands for prowess. And prowess was for us just a shorthand way of specifying how elite a particular miniature was. So prowess can be anything. You can be the best marksman in the world, you can be the best person in hand-to-hand combat, you can be just a massive bruising monster, and you'll have a high prowess. But ultimately that just gives you a little bit of extra flexibility because it's not based on any of the other stats. And the way the dice pool mechanic works is you take a stat. So if you're gonna do a melee attack, for example, you'll take your physique, you'll add your prowess stat, and that's the number of dice that you roll. and it's always a fixed target number. You're always looking for 7 or higher on a D10.
And successes will dictate the results then.
Absolutely. So I guess if the most similar system is actually, or that I've experienced, is outside of wargaming. It's in role playing. The RPG Shadowrun, which uses D6, but it's a similar system in a sense that you're building a dice pool. So the calculation is always you're either adding or subtracting dice rather than changing the target number. And that just means that all you're looking for is a set number of successes. If it's an opposed roll, obviously one or more successes on one side wins that roll. If it's an unopposed roll, it's generally just a fixed number of successes that you're looking for. But that's it. Like there's no challenging calculation.
No, it's just a plus minus. So your opponent has a pool of dice, you have a pool of dice if it's opposed, and then it's just you cancel each other out. So it's however many successes go back and forth. There's one game I can think of right now that I think is using that. And that's actually the newest edition of Heavy Gear.
Okay.
Which is a Canadian game. And that's the only game I can think of right now that's a table that's not a naval game or like a spaceship game that's using dice pools. I think it's really unique. I think that'll be it's familiar for someone like me who's played a gajillion miniature games. But I think for a lot of gamers it'll be fun because it's gonna hook their brain. It's not like what's out there right now, and I think that's a good thing probably because there's a lot that's familiar when you look at the rules. I was instantly able to understand. I was actually really jonesing to see stat cards because once I read through the alpha rules, it was nice and concise. It was just about 40 pages, and I was like, "Oh, I want to see what stuff does now." I have these pictures, but I have these rules. I want to know. I want to play a game. But that was like the missing component. Was I didn't have anything to put the miniatures in perspective just yet.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what you come up with there.
Well, the stat cards are you can have some very soon. They are very close to being
exciting. Well, let's jump into that then, because that's okay. Talking about factions. So there's 5 initial factions. Can you give me a brief blurb about each one and what kind of what's going to attract people to each one? So if they have a certain thing that they're all about and what that's going to be for the people playing.
No problem. So we've talked a little bit about the UNM before. These are we have a keyword for each of them, and which kind of makes it easier for people to identify with. We actually started off having these keywords to help us and the art team kind of get a handle on what the core drive for this faction was, but we're just going to keep it in there because it sounds cool and it helps people understand what the faction is all about. So the United Nations of Mankind are the forces of order, and they're looking to restore order. They want to bring the world back to the way it was before the breaking of the world, before this these series of kind of events took place and just destroyed our planet. So they have the biggest population, safest cities, the most guns. They are militaristic, but only in terms of primarily to defend the territory they have, and then secondarily to expand into kind of no man's land, if you like. They want to consolidate and effectively rebuild. So they're very much, I guess, a more conservative faction, if you like. But they also have lots of cool technology. If you like tanks and if you like mechs, we call them frames in Shattered Earth. So if you like mechs, the UNM are the faction to go with because they have a lot of hardware. So big guns, big tanks. The other factions that we have, so opposing the forces of order, are the forces of chaos, and they are the Cult of the Dragon. And the Cult of the Dragon are, we think, pretty unique. I'm not sure if anybody else has sort of Korean cyborgs based on Norse mythology.
I think I asked you that, didn't I? Because the dragon's name was Jormungandr.
Yeah.
It's like, are we sure that this is the right miniature? And you're like, no, it makes sense. When you read the background, it'll make sense.
Yeah. These guys are cool. They're based on the theory of Chaos Camp, which is the struggle against chaos. So if you go back, like it's as old as civilization itself, like Marduk versus Tiamat, Zeus versus Typhon. Yep. These are epic struggles in kind of folklore and religious texts.
It's mankind trying to understand and wrap his brain around controlling the world around him. Usually, that's where it all kind of stems from.
And these believe that there is no control, and that it is only an illusion of control, and that actually true freedom for mankind is in chaos, essentially. So they are led by an extremely charismatic leader called Lee Kyung-min.
I was really hoping you would say Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park. That was really nice.
He's the Korean Jeff Goldblum.
That's perfect.
It's not too far from it. He's a former K-pop star.
Okay.
Right? So, but the whole backstory for him is, I'll be very brief about this, I realize, but so he was obsessed with the occult. Okay, and he's slightly psychopathic and had these very interesting theories and these slightly suspect beliefs. But he was also extremely charismatic, and he felt that he needed a following, right, to bring his dreams to fruition. And the best way to build a cult in 21st century in the 21st century world is to become a celebrity. Yeah, the cult of celebrity is the biggest cult in the world. So he became, this huge international star, and in essentially what we call the Pan-Asian Alliance, and that's kind of formed out of what was most of kind of East Asia. So Japan, South Korea, Malaysia, the Philippines, those locations, and that was ruled by the Pan-Asian Alliance. But he essentially usurped the Pan-Asian Alliance. It was like flicking a switch. He revealed himself to be this cult leader essentially. But by this point, he has this army of followers that are completely doting, that believe everything he says, and have essentially been indoctrinated into this cult of chaos. So he's now taken over the Pacific Archipelago and rules from his kind of position of power as head of the Cult of the Dragon. But interestingly enough, we mentioned Jormungandr. As far as we know so far, he is the only human to have ever entered an etheric breach and survived, as in returned from the Immateria. But he was a little different when he came back. And he's been essentially bonded to the strongest force that he found when he entered that breach. The breach was in northern Scandinavia, hence the connection with Norse mythology. And he actually encountered the world serpent himself, Jormungandr. And they found a sense of a shared purpose, if you like. And Lee Kyung-min knew that he needed the power of Jormungandr to succeed. And Jormungandr knew that he needed Lee Kyung-min to have influence over the material world. So they have joined forces, they have combined, and now they are one and the same. Which is why there are two models on the tabletop, one for Jormungandr and one for Lee Kyung-min. And we have some interesting rules about how they interact. So this is a faction built around chaos. They are all about experimentation. They use ether with abandon, flesh grafting, to create these grotesque works of genius. And really, unrestricted. They believe that essentially the first law of the Satanic Bible, do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And that's kind of how they see themselves. So that's the Cult of the Dragon. In a little bit longer than I'd planned.
But definitely, now it's interesting though, because you mentioned that, and I think what's really compelling in faction writing is sometimes you can have an evil faction that has sympathetic characters in it. I had a question: are there any sort of sympathetic, almost good characters in the Cult of the Dragon?
Maybe. I'm not going to reveal too much now. I'll actually give you another example from one of the other factions. So,
okay, sure.
There's the forces of faith, as we call them, are the children of the one true God, and these are essentially what happened to religion in the result of the apocalypse happening, because that's basically what happened, right? Yep. So what would happen to religion? And the children of the one true God are an amalgamation of the kind of the Judeo-Islamo-Christian belief systems. Because they essentially all worship the same God, and there was a kind of a shared pooling of resources, if you like. Old rivalries haven't entirely been set aside,
right.
And that provides a lot of the meat to the narrative behind this faction, in that there are still three fundamentally different belief systems that are, for the time being, united as the one kind of main religion on the planet, as far as they're aware at this point. One of their main characters in the Children of the One True Gods faction is a gentleman by the name of Michael Abdul Shahid, who was a former UNM Marine, who found his calling and decided that his faith in God was stronger than his belief in what the UNM stood for, and actually joined the Children of the One True God. But he's an extremely conflicted individual. He understands the need for faith in this world, particularly now that they feel that mankind has essentially been a victim. Their own making has basically created this world, and they're trying to rebuild it in the image of sort of faith and godliness, essentially. So he believes in that, but he also understands that humanity does still need technology and it does still need progress, and there are still certain things that he disagrees with. So there are characters in this game that, again, it goes back to us talking about creating an authentic backstory. There are characters in this game that have to have believable drive behind them. Their moral compass has to be such that we can kind of relate to them, and we understand we don't necessarily have to like them all the time, but we understand why they're doing what they're doing, Lee Kyung-min, as we talked about, we may not like what he's doing, but there is a certain kind of acceptance that, well, in terms of his belief system, he's doing what he believes is right. He's trying to save the world in his own way.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the same with all of the factions. The fourth of the human factions is the Humanist Rebellion. And they are essentially the forces of progress. They are opposed to the United Nations of Mankind in a sense that they believe in not the old conservative values. They believe that this is, we've hit the big reset button, right?
Adapt.
Absolutely. We've got a chance to make things better now. This is about a rejection of the old status quo, a rejection of religion. We are trying to make a better place for all of humanity. But again, there are moral grey areas with what they're doing because they are experimenting with other technology, not to the extent that the Cult of the Dragon are, but they're still performing certain experiments, perhaps behind closed doors, that maybe wouldn't be acceptable in some of the other factions, for example, the UNM. So there are still lots of moral grey areas there, even if they seem like, they're looking to better mankind. They're looking to create a more open, more, equal world for everybody. But the way that they get in there maybe doesn't necessarily resonate with everybody. So I think it's difficult to, certainly with the human factions, it's difficult to really have a kind of a black and white sort of this faction is the good faction, this faction is the evil faction. And that was really important for us up front. We wanted people to feel that these are...
Everyone's making a compelling argument.
Yeah,
in some way, shape, or other, from their own point of view. The everyone's on the moral high ground, sort of from where they stand and what they can see.
Yeah, exactly. And it's up to you as a player. There's a couple of factions that chime with me, and I'm sure that there's a similar vibe with yourself, and that'll be the same with every player. They'll find different things in different factions that they like, but what I'm hoping for is that people will kind of understand a little bit about the other factions as well. And I kind of like those sort of agonizing decisions that people make when they're like, well, I kind of like these guys, but I really like these guys as well. And
it's worth noting, because I have looked at the alpha rules. You can ally factions. There are factions who will work together. So if you are really in love with two factions, there's a possibility you can use them on the table in a game.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's multiplayer rules out of the box was another big thing for us, just to make sure that people they could have their cake and eat it, basically.
Yeah. So is it model by model? That's an interesting question for faction stuff. Do you buy it? In the rules, I know it says some of them are bought as groups, some of them are bought as individuals. Are you very flexible in that regard? Like if I really liked a model from X faction, and they are allowed to ally with Y faction, I can potentially add that to my army, or is it strictly I pick models from a single faction?
That's a very good question, and one I can only partially answer.
Okay.
So, in the rules as they currently stand, if you're going to do what we call an alliance, which is two or more allied forces, you'll split the points cost equally amongst the different players. And we have some rules for if you can't split it equally. We also have some rules for balancing the game if there's a discrepancy in points, which was another important factor for us because we felt that we didn't want to hamstring people too much. We wanted, if these are the models you want to bring and it doesn't quite bring you up to the full points total, or you go bust a little bit, there are rules that actually handle that.
Right.
So that was one thing. So at the moment, yes, it's very much about kind of an even distribution. However, you may notice that there is a rule that we call loyalty, and we say in the book, please ignore this for now.
This is an idea we have for the future.
Absolutely, and it's. What we're keen to not do is to basically just go bust on the first book and give people just this massive information that they have to process like right out the gate, because it's too daunting. If we have a lot of ideas, as you can probably gather, and we don't want to flood people with those ideas to begin with. So this is one that the reason why it's in the book and we explain it a little bit and we say please ignore it is because it kind of has to be on the profile and it has to be part of for later on. It has to be there day one. So. There is a system in place that will let you ally miniatures to other miniatures within the same faction.
Okay.
And we're not ruling out the possibility that this game is going to grow and these factions are going to grow. The backstory is going to change. There is a possibility that certain characters within factions may not necessarily always be working with that faction.
Yep.
Precisely.
Evolve. Is there going to be a lot of freedom in force building? Because I didn't think it would be my last faction question. Or are there a lot of prerequisites? Some games go very much towards here's a format that your army has to fit inside, or is this more of a free form? Hey, here's the value of the miniatures. Take what you like when you build a force.
It's pretty flexible, to be honest. The only hard and fast rules are built around how many of each particular type of model you can take at a certain
point.
It's
not required necessarily to take a model, because sometimes in a game, you literally will have to buy X or Y miniature before you start building your force.
You need a leader. So we have one stipulation is you need somebody to act as the forces commander, and the reason why you need that is because there are certain rules that are keyed off that, like who rolls for initiative, like which model stats do you use. So there is a force commander, and there are rules for the force being in disarray if you lose your commander and things like that. So certain miniatures have the leader keyword. They can be a force commander. That's it. Everything else, we have basic, elite, restricted, and unique, and cool. they're just the 4 keywords for each model, and all that keyword does is stipulate how many of that particular model or unit you can have at a certain points cost. That's it. So yeah, it's pretty freeform, and it allows you, because it's quite a low model count. We're expecting this game to run somewhere between 12 to 15, probably on average.
That's a draw for some people. I love small model count games because I find I can spend more time than on the spectacle of the game and getting the scenery right and getting the feel of the miniatures right, as opposed to sort of endlessly producing regiments and regiments and regiments. I've kind of had my day of doing that, and I can play 20 different miniature games if I only need 10 or 15 models, as opposed to playing one miniature game where I need 200 models.
For sure.
So I think that is certainly a draw for some people.
Definitely, and it builds into that idea of it being a sort of a rich narrative with real personalities and real characters in the game, because we can go to town on the models if there's only 5 or 6 of them on the tabletop, right? Like, you can have far more meaningful interactions with those models, and you can spend a little bit more time on them. Particularly as well, this game is we use alternate activation, so you don't get to activate your whole force. You get to activate either one model or one unit, and then play passes to your opponent. So there's always that kind of back and forth during the game, which allows you to, as I was saying before, there is some element of kind of setting up combos in the game, but you kind of have to plan them very carefully, because your opponent gets to act in between you acting with your models.
So you talked a bit about the 4 human factions. What about the Deathless?
Yes. So the Deathless are extremely esoteric. Like, people don't know a great deal about them. What humanity does understand is that they emerged from a large breach in kind of Eastern Europe, and that's where they kind of poured out of initially. But then they kind of disappeared, and they've cropped up in multiple different locations over the globe, mostly in Europe or what was Europe and Russia. But then again, they've started to now appear in North America. Humanity has uncovered certain things about them. They seem to be led by Chernobog, literally the black god from Slavic mythology. Nobody's yet been able to communicate with them. Nobody knows what they want. They attack at will. They are extremely vicious, extremely lethal. Like, they've been wiping out whole kind of settlements, as well as what would be classed as strategic military targets. So there seems to be no rhyme or reason really to kind of their methodology. All humanity knows is they came from the Immateria, and they're trying to kill us. They're trying to wipe us out, attacking with impunity. So they are. I've been trying to think of kind of throughout us developing this faction, kind of other similar factions in other games or in fiction, and there isn't really anything that's really that close to them. Possibly, I think that the Tyranids from the 40k universe might be a good example, in a sense.
Starship Trooper bugs.
Exactly.
They can't be reasoned with. They're just they're a natural force doing what a natural force does.
Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
So alien, you can't really communicate.
Pretty much, but except with these guys, there's not like a hive mentality. There's no hive mind. Like, there are individuals. There are certainly human aspects to some of the kind of the creatures that people have seen. And that's what mankind doesn't quite understand right now. Is, again, it goes back to that question: Did we invent these guys? Did we dream them up? And and did they hate us for that? Like, what do they hate us for? Why are they attacking us? Or did they exist and we've just had these horrific nightmares about them, and now those nightmares have been made real? Like, we don't understand enough about them at this point in time. All we know is that they are extremely dangerous. They have a symbiotic relationship with Ether. They are able to do wondrous things with it and terrifying things with it. And their very presence is anathema to technology. Like, they mess up technology something fierce. Which has some very interesting implications on the battlefield, because they don't have access to technology themselves, but they have the ability to interact with that technology and do strange things with it. So that, and again, that's the fiction dialing straight down right into the game rules.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, hang on one second. We're going to skip over models and materials because we already talked about it pretty much throughout. So I'm going to clap back and we're going to go to after the crowdfund and then you and your team.
Okay.
So let's talk then about the plan for after this crowdfund. So we've talked a bit about the fact that you've got stuff in production, there's stuff ready to go. You've got 365 after that ends. What's sort of the rolling plan? I imagine it's probably only a sketch. It's like 5 or 6 bullet points on a yellow legal pad right now. but go through it with me. What's the first year for Massive Awesome if this takes off and you guys actually get into production?
Sure. I think for us, our goal really is to get the first book and the first kind of range of miniatures to go with that book out the door. Like that's like we're releasing this story, or ideally we want to release this story in chapters. So we want to get chapter 1 out. Chapter one would episodic. Episode
very really cool about that. Yeah,
definitely, because it's this living, breathing world. So chapter 1 is called Emergence, and it's about it's set in the year 30 AE, which is 30 years after the event. So this is, the world has now broken, and we've reset the calendar, we've reset the clocks, and we're going to start again. And we're now 3 decades into this. So what does the world look like? What has happened? These new factions have been established. And where do we go from there? So it's very much, you are almost, right in at the ground level when you first start playing this game. And we've got a range of miniatures for each of those 5 factions planned out for the first year. We're hoping to release them in 3 waves. And you'll get, the idea is that you'll get something for each faction in each of the waves. So that, if you're only going to play one faction, every time we release a wave of miniatures, you're always going to get something for that.
That's faction. A popular format, yeah. And that way you guys can release, 10 or 12 miniatures, but everybody gets 2 or 3 to kind of expand the rubric basically of what their faction's abilities are.
Absolutely. And we want, because, so I might not have mentioned this at the start, but we want this game to be entirely free to play. So there's again taking a bit of a kind of a leaf out of the video game book, but the rules.
To be honest, sorry to interrupt, but that's actually a popular format right now. Cool Mini or Not's Dark Age is entirely free to play. Infinity has always been free to play. There are a large number of, and actually even Games Workshop, Age of Sigmar is entirely free to play.
It is, so yeah.
There is a real, I think, movement towards, I think, the industry understanding that if you can let people behind the door, especially in this age of the internet, where you can almost demo game yourself by going to a website, looking at miniatures. It's not what it had to be, 25 years ago, where you had to walk up High Street, find a shop, and have someone explain to you what these little men were for.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you see it somewhere, you can educate yourself online. Free-to-play rules are certainly a big pro in that regard.
Definitely. Well, we want to try and go the extra mile with that, and not just release the rules for free, but we're going to release model stand-ups for free. So you can actually just print out on cardstock or whatever, fold them up, and you've got the minis to play the game with. Print out the tokens, print out the profile cards. Like, you don't have to spend a cent with us if you don't want to. Like that's kind of the point. The idea is that, and again, this is, I think, a little bit of the video game industry leading here and understanding the needs of consumers and the fact that this is an extremely crowded market. Okay, it's less crowded than the video game market is, but it's still very crowded, particularly for ostensibly what is a science fiction game. And we know that there's limited budget, limited resources out there. So if you can play this game and enjoy it completely for free, and then you think, okay, I'm going to drop whatever on a few miniatures, or I'm going to buy the nice premium hardback, or I'm going to buy the premium dice, the premium tokens, like that's your choice then. You don't need those things to play the game. You can play the game for free. You just need a little bit of, cardstock and the ink to print out on it.
Yeah.
So that's really our goal for it. And that will, so ultimately, once the Kickstarter goes live, we're hoping, and we'll certainly have the rules available, and we're hoping we're going to have the profiles for pretty much, all the miniatures that, certainly all the miniatures from Wave 1, and hopefully some of the previews from Wave 2 as well, so that people can get a really good feel for the game, like right out the door. So that first year is then about realizing that kind of goal, if you like, making sure that we get a nice, because I'm a big fan of nice books. I want a really nice hardback book. You know, it's super important for us. I know you don't make a huge amount of money on these, so this isn't for business reasons. This is purely for, like, we just want to have a nice book that people can kind of stick on their shelf. And
I think that's important to some people. I know actually for several people whose crowd funds or, you know, I've been part of, or friends I've had who run crowd funds, that's a big request. Some people just want, you know, the physical hard book. And I'm sitting here staring at 40 years worth of Games Workshop books on my shelf right now. so
I have books for games I don't even play. Like,
oh yeah, it's funny because there's a joke that I never played an RPG in my life, but I own like thousands of dollars worth of RPG books, and I bought them for the art, or I bought them because I was reading TSR novels when I was a kid, and I wanted to know more about the world. So I think I own they're probably in storage somewhere, but I own a ton of old Rifts books that are worth not Rifts books, Planescape books for D&D. Apparently a ton of money now. And I bought them purely for the art. I bought them purely for the art. But I think that's worth doing. I don't think it's a vanity thing, because if you're going to give it away for free as well, then you decide as courses.
Very much so. You decide as a consumer whether you want that product or not. We're not saying you have to have this. Like, you know, I don't want a game that I have to spend like, you know, $200 on right out the door just to be able to play a game with my friend. Like, I want to be able to try that game, and if I like it, then I'll invest. And that, you know, that's the way that a lot of, certainly the MMO video game market has gone, where, you know, the game's free, but and you can play it, you can play every aspect of that game, all the content in that game. But if you want the kind of the premium outfits or the shiny weapons or the glows or the effects, you know, you spend a bit of money on that because you don't mind investing in something if you feel that you're getting a good deal for that. And actually, it doesn't really affect necessarily the game balance. All it's doing is just maybe improving, you know, the way you play that game.
Yeah, so it's definitely borne true in this industry for Infinity. They've always had free rules, and they do sell premium hardback for all their books, and they've not had a problem growing in the last 10 years. They've just turned 10 years old, and it seems to be that the market certainly is not shying away from that attitude.
Well, I hope that continues. That's for
sure for you for the first year.
At least for the next 12 months. Anyway.
That's right. Hold steady. Hold on course. So then what's the one thing you guys really want folks to know about your team? So if you had to, if you really wanted to just take a second and speak to the people listening right now and sort of give them a message, what would you want them to know about you and the people that are behind this idea, this sort of creative endeavor that you're on?
Sure. I think for us, the most important thing to get across is it's twofold, really. It's both how passionate we are about this and how much we absolutely want to make this a reality, but also how professional we're being about it, how realistic you know, we are being with our goals, and how much we've tried to understand this industry before we ventured out into it. We've built a very, very strong team around us, a team of veterans, people that have, our sculptors have worked for Rackham, Games Workshop, Battlefront, Privateer, Fantasy Flight. You know, the guy that's doing the casting for us is a bit of an industry legend called Brian Fawcett, who some people may know as, if you have any Forge World models, certainly a lot of the original Forge World models, Brian cast those. In fact, he probably designed them. He was the guy that designed the Baneblade, amongst other things. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we made sure that we talked to the right people, because we didn't have the answers, so we got the answers. We've been through, as we said before, we've been through one complete iteration of this. We've got miniatures that we've produced, so we understand this process, and we want to stick around, right? We don't just want to do a one-shot Kickstarter. This is an opportunity for us to do something special, and we don't want to pass it up. Good.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, Simon. I'm super excited about your miniatures. That's usually all it really takes. Them, and as soon as you get me stat cards and rules and whatnot, I'm excited to play a game too. It was definitely a good sign when I read through the alpha rules and I looked at the pile of miniatures that I was assembling, and I had this. I read a great book actually once by Stephen King called On Writing. And it's his dissertation about how he writes something. And he has this thing called the gotta. And in this case, it was, I got to write an army list. I really got these two things have gotten together in my head. And I really want to know how many points I have here that I can actually play a game with. That seems to be a good sign. And I'm excited to see what you guys come up with next. So thanks again for being on.
Thank you very much, Ash. Really appreciate it.
All right, so there we go. My discussion about Shattered Earth with Simon. I hope you guys enjoyed that talk. I really enjoyed talking to Simon about it, and I thought that the insight into the design behind the game was really unique. If you guys are aspiring game designers, this is the kind of stuff that you want to hear, these sort of like pillars of design and what goes into making a miniature game. So if you guys know a product from a small company that you think is fantastic and isn't getting enough exposure, you can have them email me at guerrillaminiaturegames@gmail.com or Facebook message me at facebook.com/outofthebasement-into-the-streets. And hopefully they will get in touch. Otherwise, I can try and get in touch, but obviously, if I don't know they're out there, I don't know about them at all. So we'll see you for more Widgets and Wonders in the future. Until then, I'm Ash. Happy working.